Hello, welcome.
Okay, welcome back. We are here now for an interview with Postcommodity. Postcommodity is an interdisciplinary art collective comprised of Cristobal Martinez, Mestizo, and Cade L. Twist, Cherokee. Postcommodity's art functions as a shared indigenous lens and voice to engage the assaultive manifestations of the global market in its supporting institutions, public perceptions, beliefs, and individual actions that comprise the ever-expanding multinational, multiracial, and multi-ethnic colonizing force that is defining the 21st century through ever-increasing velocities and complex forms of violence. Postcommodity works to forge new metaphors capable of rationalizing our shared experiences with this increasingly challenging contemporary environment, promote a constructive discourse that challenges the social, political, and economic processes that are destabilizing communities and geographies, and connect indigenous narratives and cultural self-determination with the broader public sphere. Postcommodity are the recipients of grants from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Creative Capital, Art Matters, Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellowship, Harker Fund of the San Francisco Foundation, Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Shift Award, and Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions. The collective has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including at Contour, 5th Biennial of the Moving Image, Mechelin, Belgium, Nuit Blanche, Toronto, Adelaide International 2012 in Adelaide, Australia, 18th Biennale of Sydney, Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, 2017 Whitney Biennial, Art in General, New York, Documenta 14, 57th Carnegie International, Pittsburgh, Desert X in Coachella Valley, California, Art Institute of Chicago, LAX Art in Los Angeles, Minneapolis Institute of Art, Ramai Modern Museum, there in Canada. Their historic land art installation, Repellent Fence, occurred at the US-Mexico border near Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico. The collective was awarded the fine prize from Smoke and Tangled Waters. They carried fire home, commissioned for the 57th Carnegie International. Postcommodity acknowledges the important contributions of its previous collaborators, Stephen Yazzie, Nathan Young, Raven Chakan, Adam Ingram Goebel, Andrew McCord. If history moves at the speed of its weapons, then the shape of the arrow is changing and promoting a more just, verdant, and harmonious resolution. Annabelle Wong, Dead River, in Existence AD, Dead River. Postcommodity will be interviewed by Elise Chagas. Elise is a PhD candidate at Princeton. In 2021 through 2022, she was the Mellon Marin Consortium Fellow in the Department of Drawings and Prints at MoMA. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to the folks at CAA, especially Mira Friedlander, for organizing the event. I also want to acknowledge that we are meeting on unceded Lenape territory, and to mark that while New York is the site of ongoing conflicts, contradictions, and migrations that stem from its settlement, Indigenous people from across the Americas call the city home. Cristobal and Cade, thank you so much for the invitation to be in conversation this evening. It's an honor, and it's so lovely for us to be able to continue a dialogue that began in 2020 when I had the great privilege of contributing to the catalog accompanying your major exhibition, Time Holds All the Answers, at Rummy Modern. That said, my first physical encounter with your work was in 2018. I don't know if I told you guys this. I think I did the first time we spoke, but I was in the Princeton University Art Library, and I had been in there all day, and I exited the stairwell, and there's a large window that looks onto the adjacent Princeton University Art Museum lawn. and there was a huge balloon, like a yellow balloon, that had just sprung up since I had entered the library. It bore a symbol that looked like an eye, and it was just emanating this like engrossing, cryptic energy that was sort of sinister, but I was also like, is it protecting us? Like, I don't know. And so, what I had encountered was a component of your installation, repellent fence, though the term installation hardly captures what was actually an incredibly ambitious and complex logistical diplomatic project. So I'd love if you guys would start us off by chatting about that project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this was what first piece that we really organized Postcommodity around this piece. This was the first idea on the table and was really our priority number one. And we were incredibly naive. At that time, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We just imagined this being a guerrilla type of effort. And then we found out it took about 8 years of work, to realize it for, 4 days of being up. But we learned a lot about who we were as a collective, who we are as humans, our values and things like that, and the values of the collective first and foremost, I think. And it was just a tremendous piece, but it started with a really small idea and a riff. If you could just go back to the other one, is this bird repellent product. It's I was sitting in my ex-wife's backyard at the time with Steve and Yazzie. We're drinking beers, relaxing by the pool, and there was a fig tree there, and it was bird party every day in that fig tree, and she bought one of those, put it up there. Her name's Andrea Hanley, sorry, and it was covered in bird shit within 2 days. And that's what we were looking at when we came up with the idea was, like embedded obsolescence, failure. But the thing that's really interesting about it is as an object, it contained, Indian medicine colors. It contained this iconography that's used throughout the hemisphere that, brings up the idea of long-term trade north and south, because this is an iconography that's utilized, all the way from the ice in Canada down to the ice in South America. So, and places in between. So it was an opportunity to think about indigenous trade and our interconnectedness in the hemisphere. And discussions over 8 years, the piece evolved from like this really naive guerrilla stunt to a more mature, I think, epic work that bisects this border. There's two people I want to acknowledge after you, but I want you to give you space to talk. Yeah.
All right. So just real quick, if any of you are unfamiliar with this piece, it's what we refer to as an ephemeral monument. It's a 2-mile-long land art sculpture that intersects the U.S.-Mexico border. And as Kate was sharing with you, it's the manifestation of 8 years of binational trans-border diplomacy that involved conversations with over 40 NGOs, with local churches, grassroots movements, the Mexican Consulate General, and it was installed near the cities of Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta, Sonora, which is basically a singular city that over time has been bisected by an iron wall. And so one of the things that made this a viable diplomatic endeavor is we had the chance we serendipitously came across a community that had a pre-existing memorandum of understanding, and that they put this MOU together to remember themselves, to avoid the amnesia that this border was creating, and that they would collaborate with one another. And so to wrap it up here, what Repellent Fence brought was an opportunity to, in many ways, operationalize the MOU.
And, we just continuing that MOU discussion. One of the things about MOUs among border communities, usually there's a memorandum of understanding that's focusing on public safety around border crossing issues. And this was the first community we came around to that had an MOU that looked at larger social policy goals. And we felt that that was really extraordinary. But we wouldn't have even, it's funny, I went to school with a dear friend, Janae Sanchez, and got to know her and her husband, Roberto Uribe, and they live in Douglas. Janae is from Douglas, born and raised, and she is the one who invited us to come down and visit, Douglas and Agua Prieta and spend time down there. And we were like pushing away at first until we got our feet wet, and then we went right there and begged her for forgiveness, and ended up working with her and her husband. They owned together a cafe in that city, and had purchased a building downtown Douglas. And what they were is the unofficial mayors of that city, because everybody would have an important conversation about politics, about development, about the border. They would be sitting in their cafe, drinking and enjoying themselves. So that became the de facto meeting space and really ground zero for a lot of the planning and organizing efforts. But we really brought this piece in through the networks of Janae and Roberto. And just to give you an example of how strong their relationships were in the community, Roberto ended up being mayor of Douglas. Shortly after this artwork was completed. So we were working with really great people in that town. And I just wanted to acknowledge them before we got on, because just so important to this project.
Yeah, I feel like you guys have a real way of navigating, finding systems underneath the usual protocols and instruments, let's say, this is a border town, right? And as you're describing, through the relationships that you could build in this community, you were able to kind of subvert the enormous political state apparatus that ostensibly administers movement in this place, right?
Right. Yeah, we made them our partners, and they ended up being the stewards of the work.
Right.
And that really flips the script on what it means what education can do, or literacies can do, and especially when you start thinking about them as tools in order to do things. Like, for example, we had to move hundreds of cubic feet of helium into Mexico, which is a hazmat material, and it would have made the project cost prohibitive if they imported the hazmat through a port of entry that's certified for that kind of passage. But we had citizen groups on the ground learning transborder and border law, and they were able to find loopholes in order to make it possible for us to move the helium through at the Douglas Agua Prieta port of entry.
Right.
So it now starts to change, people who feel like they're, with narratives where they describe themselves as being under the thumb of their governments, they're now leveraging the agencies that they felt had been working against them in order to do things they wanted to do in their community.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I think our biggest takeaway from the project, Roberto Bedoya, I called it, he coined this term, he'd been working on this term for a number of years, and he spoke at a convening we had to celebrate the repellent fence. He said the phrase sovereignty of context. And what he means by that, and I'll embellish a little bit, is when you can align multiple layers of contexts that are driven or organized or sustained by this spirit of community self-determination. When you can align those contexts, they take on a sovereignty in and of themselves. And what we found was with this project, we could suspend federal law, we could suspend federal law, both sides of the, in Mexico and the United States, state law and city law to realize a peace. That's not an easy task to do. It rarely ends up well, and usually end up in handcuffs, So it was something, really nuanced and beautiful and quite extraordinary, especially, working with governmental decision makers. I worked in public policy for almost 20 years before I became a professor at Otis College, and I'd never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah.
And so Roberto, that was an insight that he had into this piece.
Yeah.
Was any context you could apply to the project, that context was grounded in a social goal that was shared. And each context was working to make that project a reality. And at the end of the day, all we were doing is facilitating.
Just a catalyst.
And then even when it came to the end, we weren't even facilitating. When we were installing that work, the two cities took it over.
And they
took
assigned,
they took the project over.
and they assigned the project its meaning,
Yeah, yeah,
which for them was suturing the Americas together again.
yeah. Because we were still thinking in different ways about what this was. And it's an incredibly powerful experience when meaning is made and you're served that meaning with a directive. And then the directive is taking care of all those nefarious political and public safety issues that come across in that space. And where the piece was eventually sited, it was sited in a traffic zone. And the public safety was provided by a cartel for this work.
Wow.
We had no security, we had no contracts, we had nothing but handshakes and personal agreements for a number of years, which led this to happen.
We developed, and I know we gotta move on. We
Yeah.
could spend the whole day talking about this, but we entered into well over a dozen multilingual international agreements, all using, oral traditions, and not a single one of those agreements failed. That is something that I think we're really proud of.
And there's a pragmatic reason, we couldn't insure it. So because we couldn't insure it, we couldn't have contracts.
Yep.
But
I feel like this leads into
so there's kind of a
We
funny
should
thing.
move us
Yeah.
towards the point of final collapse. I feel like this, brings us to another key post-commodity term. You guys have, a real lexicon and idiosyncratic vocabulary, right? And so I wanted to invite you to talk about this work in San Francisco in 2019 and to talk a bit about hacking, which I feel like does pick up on
Okay.
what you were talking about, a little bit of like subverting all of these, the red tapes, the maneuvers that, but also
Great.
technologies, right?
Yeah, we definitely fashion ourselves as hackers, and we see ourselves as a virus. And we're always hoping that our DNA, or the DNA that we're encoding, that they proliferate into systems and hopefully have some impact on the transformation of systems. And this particular work, what you're looking at here, is a tower in downtown San Francisco called the Millennium Tower. It's one of the most expensive, some of the most expensive real estate in the world. And it was brought to structural completion in 2016, initiated at the height of the 2008 housing market crisis. At the time of its completion, it had already sunk 6 inches. It was engineered with a tolerance to sink maybe up to 3 inches. Today, it's sunk more than 18 inches and leans over a foot.
Over 15.
Over 15 inches to one side. It continues to sink. And what we're doing is we are taking the data of the sinking and tilting Millennium Tower, and we are using that data to drive a generative sound art piece that is essentially, it's a data sonification of the sinking and tilting Millennium Tower. And the data sonification is projected onto San Francisco, particularly North Beach, with this image, using long-range acoustic devices, which are these they're like sonic ray guns that militaries and militarized police forces use around the world to essentially prevent people from public assembly.
To like disperse crowds, right?
Yeah.
And wasn't there a funny story about how you came by this piece of equipment? Is that
Yeah, we bought it on eBay.
right?
Yeah.
It's not regulated. It's expensive, but unregulated. So you can get it off the secondary markets. You don't need any permitting or training required. And it's developed, and the intention of it was to communicate across vast distances. I don't know if y'all remember the Somali pirates who just sunk a U.S. battleship. This is the result of that. That was to communicate at a safe distance. If you keep coming towards us, we will sink you. You know, we didn't have that capacity back then. That was used as an excuse. So this was seen as a safety mechanism. That's how it was branded and brought in to, you know, the public and to the world. But as Cristobal said, it has been used as a sonic weapon to disperse crowds, to prevent community organizing, and also it can be wielded to do damage to your ears. It'll drop you to your knees, make you cover your ears, and turn away from it, and that's not going to help. It's a hyperdirectional technology, so it's using very super high frequencies to carry the sonic information. Your body becomes the resonator of it. So one of the interesting aspects of the speaker is it's like having a voice whisper into your ears, and you don't know where that voice is coming
inside
from.
your head.
Yeah, so that's because your body becomes a resonator rather than the speaker. So, traditionally speaking, it's really a fascinating technology and a really fascinating tool. And it's wonderful to use something that was intended for a weapon. In this case, you know, what we're sonifying is ASMR.
And so what's happening is that as the building sinks and tilts further, we get a higher density of all these sounds playing at once. So whereas over time it gets more and more cacophonous, and it becomes more and more like the sound of noise as opposed to the sound of this therapy.
Though again, it's ephemeral, right? It's only for a certain amount of time.
4 minutes every,
That's right.
yeah,
Okay,
4 minutes
every
effective.
day.
let's see if we can cue it up. There it is.
The sample is a few minutes, but you'll definitely hear the humpback whale, some ASMR sorcery, lots of positive affirmations.
It's like nail.
We're so
right?
sorry.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing I like so
It's
much
the soundtrack
about
of
you.
neoliberalism.
That you always seem to know, right?
Dolphin sounds.
Keep calling.
Yeah.
That's the humpback whale.
You will continue to get better. You will continue to get better. You will. Doing something you don't want to do may seem hard now, but it will become easier and easier over time. Or doing something you don't want to do may seem hard now, but it will become
Forward.
That's hilarious.
Well, I wanted to make sure, I mean, we had talked about wanting to make sure to speak a little bit about the projects, the commissions for Reme Modern that you've all worked on in the last 2 years, right? That was a major exhibition curated by the Venerable Gerald McMaster in Saskatchewan. So this would move our conversation to projects within and for arts institutions, but again, kind of the museum threshold is this porous border in your work. So I wondered if you would talk about this work and how it troubles or even dispenses with notions of inside and outside.
Oh, that's hilarious, because that's what the mid-century modern architecture is supposed to be. is-
Right, so will you tell us like what this
Yeah.
this form is?
This is the zigzag or butterfly design of for a Wexler designed home in the mid 50s. A number of architects were commissioned to design homes that were that you could create it as an economy of scale around. That was the number one challenge, is let's create an economy of scale. Let's create interchangeability, modularity. Let's make a small, tight space that is repeated over and over and over again. Let's make those spaces appear unique or interesting. Let's have lots of light, and let's blur the boundaries between outside and in. A lot of these ideals were really to compartmentalize this idea of post-World War II great generation Americana, as well as other things. I'm not an architectural scholar, so you'll have to forgive my poor talk about that. But what we really wanted to accomplish with this piece is to acknowledge that the mid-century modern architecture that emerged from Wexler and the other architects that were commissioned to come up with a piece. Wexler is working with U.S. Steel, and he was working with steel as a material and wanting that to be used. But his concerns about material, about formation, modularity, and things like that. But what was happening is for population. The post-World War II suburban development, Southern California, in the desert Southwest, is you have the topsoil of this very fragile desert ecosystem being scraped off, and you have these suburban housing developments and pre-planned communities and everything that goes along with it. All of that was built, and people complain a lot about strip malls and wide streets and these kinds of repetition of mass-produced housing. But that was the lubrication, the visual lubrication, the conceptual lubrication, was that it came from high design. So high design became a point of leverage to open the hearts of the Americans to flock to the suburbs. And one of the areas where this was developed is Palm Springs. And Palm Springs is a contested space. That's tribal land. There's the Agua Caliente Reservation is there. The whole city is built on it. It's the issues around it still are not determined. In fact, while we were doing Desert X, which takes place out there, we learned of a story about the tribe buying one of the commercial properties that was a signature mid-century modern property and just raising it and building their own property on it. That's the type of contentiousness that we have, where self-determination is sometimes it's about removing an architectural form from your boundaries, an architectural form that signifies a land run, that signifies crazy consumption, and that signifies a worldview that alters the landscape forever. And we imagine ourselves truck hunting. Anyone here hunt? I don't know, probably not. It's art, but we hunt.
We're New York.
We imagine ourselves truck hunting. A lot of people think like hunting is a sacred thing and whatever, but I'll tell you what, I think more Indians truck hunt than white people do. I'll tell you that for sure. We truck hunt because we need the meat. It's not a trophy. It's about survival. So it's about sharing, and it's about practicing our culture in other ways. But we imagined truck hunting through Palm Springs on the res there, on Agua Caliente land, and seeing one of these houses under construction and getting out our skill saws and cutting poaching the rooftop, the truss, because that's a signature truss design, and putting that on our truck, driving it, and then displaying it as a taxidermy. So that's our conceptual riff and humor and things like that. But really we wanted to hack at mid-century modernism. It's such a white fantasy. I can't think of another architectural form that inspires white smiles as much as mid-century modern. It's like one of those spaces where white people can just feel at home in their skin, So that's what we wanted to get that tension and have it float in a gallery space.
I think we're also in many ways provoked by what has happened with mid-century modern architecture, particularly in Palm Springs. These are not referred to as homes anymore. They're now referred to as pieces. And so we're looking at multi-million-dollar fetishization, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fetishizing homes as works of art. And so people collect them, and they're second homes, and they're venerated, and they're seen as one of the greatest things that could have happened in this golden atomic age era of America. But this is a virus, that spread, and now this virus has the land is suffering from this great infection, in particular particularly in desert climates like Palm Springs and Phoenix metropolitan area. We're looking at massive, severe drought and then massive overdrying of the reservoirs. And so this it's interesting that this happens at a time of the atomic bomb, because it's really in a lot of ways a metaphor of the atomic bomb and signaling enormous catastrophe now at our doorstep. So we had to tell this story. We had to go in there and hack into this architecture and begin to reimagine the narratives that are associated with it.
And just give you an example of reality, and this will probably lead into the next slide maybe, but I was born and raised in Bakersfield, California, and the valley floor, the great San Joaquin Valley floor, it's a massive valley. It's sinking in some places at a foot a year because of the water table. The water has been extracted from the table, not recharged into the aquifers. So you have a massive sinking. Okay, I thought that was bad. I moved to Phoenix. Same thing is happening in Phoenix. It's sinking at a very similar clip. It seems like wherever I go, the floor, everything's sinking, and you can't undo these things, just like the tower, the idea is it's a built thing. We can engineer it. Well, you can't, because it's built on infill mud from the bay. There's no bedrock there. There's no stabilizing agent. Plus, you're one of the most dangerous locations in all of California in terms of all the active faults that are around there. That's the kind of intelligence that the Judeo-Christian Western scientific worldview brings to its development strategies. The underlining thing is, this is temporary. We're moving on to a greater place. So there's this one disaster after another disaster, after another disaster, after another disaster. So it's kind of depressing. So we have to make it funny at least. So, that's a taxidermy. We harvested it, we poached it.
I think the conversation about water does lead to the next slide, another commission that I wanted to ask you all about. Going to water, right? It's, again, sort of you've repurposed images, found images in a sense, right? I'd love to hear you talk about this work, and I specifically want to note the role of the soundtrack. Just invite you to speak a little bit about sound.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about the policy in Owens Lake, and I can talk about, the score and the composition we put together.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk, because I know you guys have a background in experimental music as well, and so I wanted to, I hope there was an opportunity to talk about sound.
Sure. Yeah, the thing about this, just real quick, everybody's seen Chinatown, the movie with Jack Nicholson? It was about Owens Lake. Owens Lake is a drainage lake on the eastern side of the Sierras. We're talking about something that stretches about 100 miles long. At least it did at one time. And about 40 miles wide. And it was one of the most environmentally significant areas in California for the riparian population. It was a place of migrating birds. It's also a great meeting place for Indian people. It's all Paiutes in the Great Basin. This is part of the Great Basin. And there's a lot of Bishop Paiute, Lone Pine, Paiute, and so forth, Big Pine, Paiute. They all would meet there, and all the bands. But the water that drove them to meet there has been illegally taken by the city of Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power. And it's the only place I know of in the United States where you have a place out, like a governmental entity like LA Water and Power, that is exercising its jurisdiction outside of its county, outside of its city. Because you'll go to Owens Lake, which is very close to Mammoth Mountain. Anyone ever ski Mammoth Mountain? You'll drive right by that, and you'll drive by where it's dry. And you'll see it on the road. But long story short, that water's been forever, it's gone. They drained that way back in the 20s. And what you have now is another environmental disaster where you have the dirt, the soil dried up from that used to be covered by water, has all the poisons of agriculture and so forth. So now that when it blows in the air, it's carcinogenic. And this is a place of high winds, and the water is not keeping the dust from going. So what you have is some of the highest rates of cancer in the United States in that area. And it's not just happening there, it's also happening to the Great Salt Lake. Same situation now is happening in the Salt Lake City area in Utah. So they're actually using this as a case study to study. So they have multiple governments, county, state, federal, tribal, all working together to monitor the wind and to try to find a generative way to mitigate that dust. So what they do is they redirect water. LA still draws water from here, but they set up these retaining ponds and they use it for a sprinkler system. So they have a sprinkler system to help keep the dust down. That's the engineering of the 21st century. But they're trying to find ways of doing this that are efficient. Of course, we all want efficiency. And that type of study is going to be shared all over the world. This is becoming a global problem. It's also the same thing is also happening at the Salton Sea, which is in the interior desert, south of Palm Springs, east of San Diego. It's the largest interior lake in California, which was an accident. There's a breach in the Colorado River that created the Great Salt Lake, or the Great Salton Sea, so it should have never existed, but it still has the topsoil. It's still very carcinogenic, and that's what we're up against in the Southwest. So we wanted to use their environment, this intergovernmental framework for addressing this and working together, and they have over 22 cameras that survey the land every day, and they're monitoring that dust. And we wanted to, as a ready-made, bring that system into a museum. And that's what you see in that image. We have all of the videos are cycling through. There's 4 channels on the right, 4 channels on the left, and then the center channel. So all 22 of those cameras cycle through those places. And we found the windiest day of the year leading up to our show, and it was February 11th or something of 2021 is what we are presenting.
Yeah, so in the video, what you see is what amounts to a massive dust storm, brewing, and you get to witness that on surveillance. So this is like policy in action. And so what we did was, where Kate shared with you that we bring a lot of humor to our work, but in this case we really brought a lot of sorrow, like sad. We felt very, it's a really sad situation. One of the things that makes it so sad is the idea that we put land under surveillance. Like it's bad enough that we put ourselves and each other under surveillance, but now we're doing it to the land. And so we could think about that land as body metaphor starts to rear itself. And so this is kind of a grieving, a mourning and a grieving for loss, a sense of loss. And so we spent a great deal of time. This was during when there were a lot of COVID restrictions, and we found a way to set a studio up, an audio studio up, using the internet, so we could go into studio sessions together, because we thought that the way to really express this policy in action was through a soundtrack of great sorrow, great grief, while at the same time celebrating the extraordinary beauty of the land. And so this is something that is very reflective. You see a lot of, going back to your question, we're constantly looking to sound for the answers, not as much through speaking, but mostly by listening. That's what makes projects like Repellent Fence possible, is like how we function as an ear, how we function and work really hard to stretch our senses to try to understand and to try to get a sense of the world around us. And so I feel like with all the years of making sound art and doing performance and listening, that all of that experience really came to great service for us when we were putting this soundtrack together, just because of the gravity of the situation. And it was hard. I mean, we spent a lot of time on the phone and a lot of time in these studio sessions just tearing our hair out, trying to find the right, resonance. Like, how do you make a sound that creates a kind of resonance that expresses the deep, deep sorrow and mourning and grieving and catastrophe of this situation?
That also captures the beauty
and the
power of the area. It's one of the most beautiful places in all of California, because you have Mount Whitney and all the 14,000 foot peaks on one side, and then you have, I forget the name of the mountain range, on the Nevada side. The valley divides California and Nevada, and on that Nevada side, it's all 12,000 foot peaks. So it's like 14,000 foot peaks, 12,000 foot peaks. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and all we can do is imagine what it once was.
Yeah.
And so it was that longing for that beauty that it was dead before we were born.
Yeah.
Like, this was long before we were born, but it's just that idea of beauty that we're seeking.
And I think that comedy, because there's still comedy in it, and where the comedy comes in is that this is a 16-channel sound installation. We use all the techniques of cinema. We thought a lot about Hollywood filmmaking, the Hollywood discourse that is implicated in this loss, and having created this loss. But we studied Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, and so when you come into this space, you have this truly very highly crafted experience of sort of cinematic experience of sound and moving image.
Was it 18 channels?
It's like, yeah.
I think there is like a dark humor, right? And the soundtrack is very like elegiac. I encourage everyone to have a look on the website. And certainly a lot could be said about the critical renovation year of like the American landscape tradition, right? To think of like 19th century vistas or whatever,
Absolutely.
The bounty of this place. But I received the signal concerning rapping.
Okay, awesome.
And so we will maybe...
We don't have it.
It's on our website, postcommodity.com, the sound file for that. You can check out a sample, I think.
Yeah, it's called Going to Water.
Going to Water.
Going to Water.
Yeah.
I did there was one more project. Okay, I don't know if you guys wanted to talk just a little bit about Cosmovisión to give like a preview.
Yeah.
I know I have some like Latin American fellow art historians who may be interested, but also I know you guys are moving towards exploring kind of hemispheric, moving your project into a more hemispheric scope.
One of the exigencies for this piece, for Cosmovisión, which translates roughly into worldview, is that a lot of the conversation around diversity has been focused on race, and not enough about worldview. As Indian people, we're not racial people. We don't identify as a race. We identify as members of a sovereign nation. We're citizens, right? We're not a race of people. We're citizens of nations. And what non-Indian people, they get confused because they want to racialize, like BIPOC, right? I don't appreciate BIPOC because it racializes us as indigenous people. And it's very difficult to have a conversation when people are damn set on racializing you, and because they're always disappointed. Indians are never enough of anything for them to satisfy them. So if we focus on worldview, maybe that's something a little bit more substantial. Because that's what our cultures are about. They're defined by worldview. And so getting to that primacy of who we are, where we came from, the land that is beneath our feet, all of these things, if we want to talk about meaning making as people having intercultural, interracial conversations, we can't do it talking purely about race.
Yes.
We have to talk about worldview because that's where meaning is made. Meaning is not made by anyone's color of skin. Meaning is made by our history, our legacy. You know, those are practiced over since time immemorial. So all you people wanting to racialize Indian people, stop. Just stop it. You know, take us out of BIPOC. We don't belong in that. You know, you all, the people of BIPOC they're colonizers. They're not from the hemisphere. So to think about them as us, as being one and the same, BIPOC doesn't help. What helps is if we just sit together and listen and talk and enjoy each other's nuanced worldview and appreciate and honor how that worldview came into being and appreciate that these people, us, them, all of us are represented by that. And let's engage at that level of worldview. I can't tell you how hard it is to be at an institution where they're doing the DEI stuff, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, and it's only focusing on race. It doesn't get into any meaningful discourse. Only it gets into us against them. That's the only way we can talk about race is us against them. It signifies that. But if we could talk about worldview, we could get on a deeper level of meaning. So Cosmovision is as an idea and as an ideal is about bringing people together to make music, to listen and to make music together that is focused on listening across worldview.
Yes.
Making meaning across worldview.
So, you know, to extend a little bit about what you're saying, I think what the race discourse does is it operates under the assumption that meaning is in our minds. That meaning is embodied by the individual. And the work that we're operating under, and you find this also in social linguistics, is that meaning is a consensual and a contested activity between people, and that meaning circulates through and among us as we either argue with one another or try to collaborate with one another in order to come to some ideas, some general ideas of what we believe to be good and beautiful. And so we're looking to try a new strategy with this work. And so this work is going to be a hemispherical work. We hope will be, our plans for this work is that it will result in indigenous-led dialogical conversations that help us maybe better understand a little bit more about what it means to be American, and not in the US, but American in our hemisphere at this point in time in the 21st century.
And it builds on the work that Juan Downey was doing, his video work. He was trying to capture, I mean, what does indigeneity mean in the Americas? You know, he had a vision for going from one tip of the Americas to the other on that type of project. And that's a major inspiration for this project, is to try to contribute to the wonderful work that Juan Downey did before he passed away at such a young age, you know. But that's really driving it, is just to want to know our shared understanding. And so it's an instrument that 4 people play simultaneously. They play with samples that they take from field recordings of their relationship to place. So it's looking at the intricacies of place through the construct of iconographies. And those iconographies will be what they're playing. So each player is going to be performing their own iconographies. Everybody's from the same place. So we'll be able to listen to a very nuanced relationship of individual to place, and when we're working in tribal communities, of a tribal community to place, you know, in ways that language doesn't get in the way of, you know, being, listening, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, everyone is, I'm sure, I mean, I'm excited to see how this project develops and the sites that you all travel to. Maybe we have some questions about that or other things presented. The floor is open. The microphone is in the center of the ballroom.
I'm not sure if you actually had the opportunity to talk about it executively, but considering that you were talking about some of the work that you did in California, what was your experience with Desert X in particular? I have sort of a personal interest in it because I'm from that area, and those histories are deeply problematic in that region. So I would love to hear what happened in particular with your work with Desert X and working with among the community stakeholders out there.
Desert X is, well, it's you know, it's a young thing. It's a lot of learning to do and a lot of growing and all that. And they have their own challenges in and of themselves, like any arts institution does. They've brought a lot of great artists into that area, and there's been so much wonderful work produced. I think the stewards of mid-century modern history is what your Modern Week and all those, that whole crew. We did a sound piece where we interviewed them all, and then we hired actors just to restate that interview as a pedagogical feedback model from one generation to the next. It was like grandmother speaking to grandchild, you know, and because a lot of the people said taste skips a generation. So we wanted to have that, okay, taste skips a generation, that's in our notes, so our piece is gonna reflect that. So the actors actually, you know, re-spoke our recorded interviews. So we have, I mean, that piece that we did at Desert X, those are the gatekeepers of mid-century modern. We met them all, and we went to their Modernism Week, and we filmed there and hung out with them. You know, they probably felt like there's a little bit of a bait and switch with that. We also, that's probably the first piece that we did where we abandoned the 4 R's of relationships, respect, responsibility and reciprocity. Like, we said, you know, the idea was we're going to imitate like 18th century ethnography. And that's what we brought to that project, was an 18th century model of ethnography. I studied at the University of Oklahoma and got to learn all about that stuff when I was there. So we just applied those research methods to our conversations, to where the subjects were empty forms. They had no soul. We don't care about that, what their responsibility or what their lives are about, their dreams, their hopes, their expectations, who they love, all that. We divorced ourselves from that relationship. It was really hard, and it felt dirty. But the piece is glorious. It was a really glorious sound piece. And one of the things we asked them, like, what are your anxieties? And they said Mexicans. They said Indians. They said wind and earthquakes. And
That's it.
yeah, develop.
No, it was really wind and,
Yeah,
and
wind.
earthquakes.
And Mexicans and Indians. That's what they said to us while they're being recorded, talking to. So, it was a beautiful piece in that regard, because it got all those things on the record, and it informed how, the field recordings we did. We recorded a fault, the San Andreas Fault goes there. It recorded the fault. We recorded the windmills. We had a radio station, a Hispanic radio station playing in that. And then we also had the voices of the actors mixed in with the anxieties. And so it was taking place in a house that was being revitalized, remodeled to be the Wave Home, which is a very historically significant architectural piece. It was wonderful because it was there for a month, and it was a part of the construction site. So the construction site's a performance. The organization of tools and materials is part of that performance. The transformation of the place from shell to finished product was part of the performance. So I'll have to say, like, Desert X, the curators we worked with, Matthew Shum and Amanda Hunt, those are two amazing people. And they had our backs, and they got everything to work so that we could be there in that, poking with a stick, in their most sacred place. And it was probably the most punk rock thing that we've ever done as Postcommodity.
We I don't think could have succeeded without the curators, Amanda Hunt, Matthew Shum, for what I feel like is embedded and inferred in your question, because Desert X as a greater project, once you start to get into the inner sanctum and you get really close to the center of power, you start to realize it's a vanity project, and that vanity project is trying to reflect New York in the desert. And it, started by someone who is a New Yorker and retired and started to try to reimagine Palm Springs in the image of all of the amenities and cultural experiences that she was used to enjoying in New York. And so when you have that kind of a foundation laid for a larger house, it requires for us, it required that we had real allies, within the system, because there would be so many things working against us in that environment politically and economically, because our discourse is essentially we're analyzing their discourse to build a discourse, to show a story behind the story, and to provide counter narrative that could potentially impact the value of their work.
It is about value, economic value. And that's a whole part of Modern Week, is to ramp up the value of those homes. Oh,
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
that's the power of sound, though. The power of sound is you can't, it's invisible. You can't, your ears are always open, right? And when an institution is trying to operationalize you as an artist, they can't operationalize something they can't see. And so we did the same type of thing in Documenta. Documenta was, when we were in Documenta, it was horrible. Documenta 14 or whatever. Just trying to operationalize an artist into disaster tourism. And so that's why we worked with sound there. We had no site presence. We used the land as a mediator and the ruins as a mediator, and then we have sound. And then in Castle, we just had pink noise playing at an entry place out of hyperdirectional speakers. We just didn't, it was so gnarly that's the only way we felt like we could be there without pulling out of the exhibition. Because don't mistake it, we were there for our CV. We weren't there for Germany or any other reason. It was just the CV. Because that place doesn't facilitate any dialogue among the artists or anything. The party celebrating the opening is in the train station that was managing the logistics of taking Jews to concentration camps. I mean, it's a brutal, Documenta is on brutal turf. That is a brutal history. And sound helps deal with brutality. And I think that's the great thing why we go back to hyperdirectional sound, we go back to the LRAD, is because sonic weapons work. They work. At the end of the day, they're like, God created them for a reason. And it's not scaring crowds. It's being everywhere and nowhere at once. That's why they're created.
I think there's one more question, and then maybe we'll wrap up. I know we're already pushing it.
Thank you so Test, hello?
Okay, I can just project. I was really fascinated by a lot of your discussion around fantasy and modularity and kind of these myths at mid-century that were created around like the Salton Sea, which was a resort town and became this hellscape, right? Or the fantasies of the vistas that have dried up around Mammoth. And a lot of what your work seems to get to, or makes me think of at least, is this kind of fantasy that's also a hellscape. And so I was wondering what other spaces you've been wanting to think about or working about, that you have in a separate file of kind of projects to do. Are there other spaces you're curious about?
I think we're really drawn to where we call home. Like Cristobal's drawn to New Mexico. I'm drawn to California. He lives in Phoenix. I lived there for 10 years, so we're both drawn to that as like neutral turf. And if you take those three states together, you have more endangered species of animals, and you have more endangered ecologies than anywhere else in the United States. So it's enough. It's a lot to work from. But if there are any curators out there, we work on commissions only, and we would be happy to think through a place that you might be interested in. I'm kind of joking, but yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of disaster spots in the United States.
Well, the same time that he's joking, there's always truth to humor. There's always a certain degree of truth to humor, and that's something that we oftentimes find ourselves, more often than not, trying to situate ourselves as guests wherever we're invited to do commissions, and we try to make work that's meaningful to the people or the citizenry by which we have been invited to be a part of. And so that happens over and over and over again. If you go and you look at our catalog of work, you'll find us always trying to leverage resources and expertise as a catalyst, as a way so that people could could use what we bring to the table to tell stories so that we could connect those stories of cultural self-determination with publics everywhere we go. And we did that in Greece as well. And that was really hard to do because there are very complex narratives of colonization between Germany and Greece, and there was an interest in leveraging our narratives of colonization in search of meaning and unpacking issues in Europe, and I struggle to speak about this because when we proposed a work for Aristotle's Lyceum, and on the record, the Greek Archaeological Authority basically said it was unanimously voted against, and they said, well, what do Indians know about Aristotle anyway? So that's the place where we have to work from.
And that went out over the press in Europe, like it was in all the major city papers. Sorry.
So, but we still, we still have to find the generosity to still be respectful guests and try to learn and try to understand, and that's the work that we did. And in the end, they went from a unanimous no to a unanimous absolutely, you've got it. They let us point weapons at it, and so it's. I mean, yeah. Cade's joking at the same time. He's also telling the truth. We do honestly try to listen to what's going on in a place. It goes back to the sovereignty of context with Roberto Bedoya, what Cade was sharing earlier at the start of the talk. We really want to respect that.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you. Thank you
And
both
thank you all.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise.